Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, everyone out there. Welcome to our Being a Culture Leader at Michigan Engineering DEI Lecture Series panel that includes members of our staff, faculty, and student community. My name is Gabe Javier. I serve as the Executive Director of Culture, Community, and Equity, and I'll be moderating today's panel. So welcome. I'd like to take the opportunity now to welcome our panelists. To start is Zeinab Ismail. Zeinab is a second-year PhD student at the University of Michigan studying mechanical engineering. She is the current co-president of the Mechanical Engineering Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Alliance on campus and hosts a series of heritage celebrations highlighting the different people behind the STEM work. Zeinab is also involved in the Mechanical Engineering Graduate Council volunteering branch, which organizes a series of outreach events for adolescent and middle school children to get exposed to sciences, engineering research, and opportunities. Her career goals include finding alternative energy sources to lithium-ion batteries that won't negatively affect the environment. Welcome, Zeinab. Our second panelist is Jordan Marshall. Jordan is the DEI program coordinator for the Civil Environmental Engineering Department at the University of Michigan, and she stepped into this role in 2023. Jordan obtained her Bachelor of Social Work and Certificate in Critical Cultural Competence from the University of Iowa in 2021 and achieved her Master of Social Work from the University of Michigan in 2023. Her professional background has been in the nonprofit sector, research, DEI, higher education, and so on. Both her academic and professional backgrounds have further fueled her passion for promoting community and working to create spaces where equity, justice, and belonging are the norm. Welcome, Jordan. And finally, John Estrada. John is an assistant professor in mechanical engineering, specializing in experimental mechanics of soft and biomaterials, particularly at high rates and using 3D imaging techniques. Trained in material science and engineering at MIT and solid mechanics at Brown, John's research leverages optics toward material and system characterization in biomedical applications. After joining the Mechanical Engineering Department at the University of Michigan as a research fellow, working on material characterization using magnetic resonance imaging, John joined the faculty in January 2020. He is the recipient of a 2024 NSF Career Award for improving both experimental and teaching-based assessments in solid mechanics. John currently serves as the chair of the Dean's Advisory Committee for Faculty of Color and has been heavily involved in the multi-university Next Prof and seismic programs. Please welcome our panelists, Zeinab, Jordan, and John. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to dive right in. Um, I'm going to start with Zeinab. Now, what do you think are some of the key characteristics of a culture leader at our college?
I think a few come to mind, beginning with probably being very open-minded. From personal experience, like you won't know everything about like all the marginalized communities. You won't have that knowledge, but you have to be very willing to gain that knowledge, use the resources, be able to communicate with a lot of people. Um, that's like one of the most important ones. Second would be just being a good facilitator for those conversations. You have to be very open with people to the point that they can be vulnerable and then creating a safe space for them to be able to, show who they are and be able to contribute properly to whatever group or field you're in. And I think like the last one would be probably resilience. I think with any type of change in DEI or just change in general, sometimes resistance is like a normal precursor to it. So I think like being able to be resilient through that is very important.
Absolutely, I totally agree that resilience is such an important element and aspect of being a culture leader. You mentioned being open-minded and being able to communicate and really, that space to be vulnerable. John, I'm wondering if you have, in your experience at other institutions, or even as the DAC FC chair, have you seen key characteristics of a cultural leader at our college?
For sure. And thank you for the opportunity. I think what leadership comes down to is, it's leadership of what, right? And you have to care about values. The values of our college, there are five of them. It's leadership and excellence, there's creativity, innovation and daring, diversity, equity, and social impact, there's collegiality, and transparency. Those are the listed values of our college. And I mean, COE broadly just values taking charge, being bold, bringing unheard voices to the table, improving society, working with each other, all these things. And so doing so, you know, while being open about your intentions is critical here. But I see a couple things that separate like that kind of list and make us different at Michigan Engineering in terms of leadership. And the big one I think that's specific to our college is daring. Um, by definition, daring's not picking the safe option. Just as you mentioned, there's resistance sometimes, and to me, I internalize this as if I go down swinging, which kind of fits into that mantra. But being a leader means you set the tone, right? So that means doing things that aren't easy but are important, and often showing others by example first that they can work. But I think there's another piece to it, and that maybe is an aspect that I like to call respectful irreverence. You don't want to walk into every space and just tear it down immediately, but you don't want to treat the status quo as good either. So you have to know where we want to go, where we want to be, and figure out what we need to do to get to that place. And so that's really where strategic planning comes in, and a lot of the work we do, kind of at the broader level, and that you do, Gabe, in particular, at the higher level.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that idea of respectful irreverence, and it draws a through line to what Zainab was talking about in terms of resilience as well. Um, Jordan, do you have any thoughts about what are some key characteristics of a culture leader at the college?
Yeah, and I think it kind of couples with being open-minded, but just the importance of being self-reflective and working to understand your own self and your own identities and how that impacts the way that you move throughout the world and the way that you interact with other people, and willingness to unpack, any of your own potential bias so that you can do good in your communities in terms of doing unintentional harm. But when unintentional harm is caused, also being able to hold yourself accountable and being able to work to do better and committing yourself to do better. So even when mistakes are made, knowing that it's your job to own up to them and move forward and try your best to rebuild trust too in those areas.
That's great. And that really sounds like humility to me. The ability to be humble when we make mistakes and be bold and as we move forward. So yeah, I agree with all of you in terms of those are some really key characteristics to being a culture leader at our college. And John, thank you for shouting out those values that we have on the walls, in terms of transparency and collegiality and really daring. So John, I want to stick with you for a second. What do you think is the most important lesson you've learned about leadership and culture?
Yeah, I think that the most important ones are ones that Jordan and Zainab have already alluded to, and it's uh, the way I internalize the first one about really listening to others is kind of to start by never assuming motive in others. Just start conversations by listening. I think those are really that's maybe the most important thing, to go in with an open mind, make sure you're hearing folks and not just speaking with them. But then there's more of that too. There's really, in order to make things in order to change things or to improve things along the axis you want to improve them, you really have to try things and show that they're effective, because nothing really speaks to engineers louder than data that's tested, right? Much of what I think is felt as pushback comes from a place from some as like, let's make sure that we have a control group and that our hypothesis is confirmed. They come from that kind of skepticism a lot of the time, and so it's important to remember we're all on the same team, right? We're Michigan. I'm certainly proud to be here with the opportunity to work alongside brilliant engineers and staff in different phases of their careers, right? Student all the way up through faculty. And finally, like maybe the last lesson that I've really found to be critical is to be taken seriously. You really, you have to show that you live your lessons in the classroom, as a mentor, as a teacher, as someone in service, and just in those same one-on-one chats with your colleagues. Doing all of that, I think, really allows you to work with others and get to new heights in an important, like, you know open kind of way.
Yeah, that's great. What I feel like I'm hearing you talk about is this consistency of character, right? So who you are when you show up in the classroom is who you are when you show up in office hours, and you show up in organizations and clubs. And I think that's really important at the confluence of leadership and culture. Zainab, do you have any thoughts about that? What about things that you've learned about leadership and culture?
Yeah, I think like through my experience as the co-president of the DEI Alliance, I think um I've learned about just having to manage a very diverse group of people and opinions, and having to, facilitate good conversations that lead to change within our own groups. So like we have like certain types of celebrations that we hold within the department, like heritage celebrations, and we really enjoy doing those and like bringing other like groups that we haven't done before. Like recently we did Native American Heritage Month, and it was like very good bringing a speaker from another department to be able to speak on issues that I probably won't have much knowledge on. And we really enjoyed doing these type of events, but we also want to like expand from just like solely cultural celebrations, but more like direct advocacy work. How could we give back to these communities instead of just celebrating the cultures very generally? And going back to like just being able to represent the student body properly. Um, I think we get stuck in like certain routine things, and we have to just remember, what does the student body feel comfortable with, and what would they like to see be done within the department. Yeah, mostly these type of things.
That's great. And I really appreciate you mentioning the Native American celebration that Ami recently did. It's so important, as you mentioned, not just lifting up stories that we don't usually perhaps get exposure to, but really beyond celebrating, how do we advocate and truly, you know, uh, incorporate the lessons that we learn from other cultures into our own. And it goes back to cultural humility too, about how we learn from the exchange of cultures around us. Um, I'm going to stick with this idea of leadership and culture for a second. Jordan, any thoughts about important lessons you've learned about leadership and culture?
Yeah, I think when it comes to leadership, one of the things that I learned, I think very quickly, was that just because something has been done historically one way, doesn't necessarily mean it's always the best way. And I think being open to various approaches and strategies when it comes to promoting DEI definitely influences the culture and allows for you to kind of tailor your approaches more directly to your community and actually serve the community that you're in. And I believe John touched on this a little bit, but also that like evaluation and assessment are your friend. Trial and error are going to happen, but to not get discouraged, because DEI work does take patience and it does take time. And trial and error is just part of getting better and working towards your goal.
I really resonate with that idea of it takes time and patience is so important. The idea that we have to keep trying to see what resonates with people is such an important piece of people's DEI journeys. And it's going to be different for different people. And I think that can be really hard, that can be really frustrating, but it can also be really effective. Um, so, I'm wondering if you have any advice to give new students or staff members or faculty members who want to be effective culture leaders within the engineering community. So do you have any advice? What would you share? Jordan, I'm going to start with you. Like, what advice might you have?
Absolutely. I think the biggest one is really just taking the time to engage with the people in your community, to network, to get to know your leadership, to get to know the individuals that make up the students, faculty, and staff. Because at the end of the day, we're all here together, and we're all here for this, common goal of growing together, learning together, being better people together, being engineers in service to society. And taking the time to understand these people at their core and where they come from, trying to better understand their perspectives and the lenses that they see the world through, because that's truly how you're going to meet people where they're at to try and further change. But when you're doing that change, also like not being afraid to make mistakes, kind of like I said earlier, but taking accountability when you do, just because kind of like I said, mistakes will happen, but it's still part of that learning process, and that growing process, because DEI is constantly changing, it's constantly evolving. But it's kind of our duty to be active and evolve with it and change with it, and bring our community with us to collaborate when we do that. But finally, I think it would more just so be like, don't forget your why you want to engage with this work and what brought you to this work. I think it really does prevent burnout because, like we talked about, it takes patience to do DEI work. Sometimes it takes a long time, and sometimes there's not that like immediate reward. But when you put in the work and you remember your why, that's really when you can make some like meaningful change and you can kind of carry out your work that does take that longer amount of time.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. The idea of our why, going back to that and really being anchored to that why as we sort of move forward, whether it be career progression or as we sort of figure out the tapestry that is, in this case, Michigan engineering, remembering our why becomes really important. So thank you for sharing that. Zainab, what advice? You're a student leader and lead organizations, and you're a couple years into your PhD. So what advice would you give to new students who want to be effective culture leaders?
Yeah, I guess a few things come to mind. Starting with not to be afraid to join these initiatives, even if you don't have the experience. Like you learn along the way and you meet a lot of like really good people that teach you these important things. Um, a second thing would probably be to remember, like, despite us being, scientists, and sometimes we may like disconnect with the student body and with other people when we're focused on just research, that it's important to realize what our work is contributing to. It's for people. And it's just extremely, at least in my experience, rewarding to see how my work directly affects people, like in volunteering experience, being able to represent like an Arab American woman in science and show other younger women, younger girls who come from my background that, oh, like I can do that as well, and get excited for science just for seeing a person that represents them in that field. But yeah, that's mainly it.
That's great. So I'm hearing like connecting to people based on their backgrounds, and their shared experiences of, not being afraid to be involved, even if you don't think that you have the expertise, because showing up can be as significant to another person, and you just may not know that. That's really sound advice. So thank you for sharing that. John, what about you? What advice do you give new faculty members or students who want to be effective culture leaders?
Yeah, this is a complicated one because the advice for those different careers are quite different. New faculty members, well, I'll get to that in a second. The first thing I want to mention though is I resonate with Jordan's point of don't forget your why so much. I mean, it I mentioned earlier that it comes about values, right? And if you're making sure you're kind of like living those authentically, certain things will resonate with you more. I personally really care about student equity. That's like what really, really drives me in my classroom, in research. Uh, I'm Latino. I'm first gen college. I come from a humble SES background, and equity data in early STEM courses nationwide is bad on all of those demographics and others. I mean, there are plenty of demographics that just across the board have just different grade outcomes, disparate grade outcomes, as compared to majority folks. And I kind of started very similar to how Zainab described it earlier, with like just getting to know new areas. And for me, it was via CRLT, the Center for Research and Learning and Teaching, in a short course. And this was kind of because as an incoming faculty member, I wanted to know if I had blind spots and wanted to learn from expertise. And we have expertise here at the college. So I ended up continuing on in improving student equity as part of the seismic effort run by Tim McKay, Dean of LSA. And those efforts actually really were like, they gave me a personal direction to go, which I ended up turning kind of into the outreach part of my NSF Career Award. So, in short, what you should plan to do is get a platform, right? Do with your time what aligns with your values, and for young, or not young, but early career faculty, this is kind of critical because you get pulled in a lot of different directions. And you want to protect your time to the degree that you can continue in this in the long term. Oftentimes, folks get kind of uh, overburdened in some sense, whether that's by volunteering or being voluntold to do service things in their faculty jobs. And so you do have to make sure that in some sense you're doing the things that uniquely you can do. And that's critical. Like I think of these as eigenvalue problems because I'm a mechanical engineer. So it's like, are you the right person to do this, right? And if so, then go for it. If not, like you can help facilitate that, but there's a limited amount of time per day, and you have to make sure that you're still progressing your career so you can be there in the long term and be an advocate and not burn out. Right. So there is another, an other side balance, of course, but then it's a matter of like, how do you recruit others to the cause, right? And find others that will help build efforts into bigger efforts. And I think the delegation part is a critical aspect of leadership that's often overlooked as critical. So yeah, I mean, do what resonates with you at the end of the day, but you have to also position yourself to be a very impactful, cultural contributor.
That's great. And I think you enumerate that tension really well. This idea that how and when you show up, how and when you show up is an investment in future generations. How do you lift as you climb? These are all like really fundamental, and I think really great wisdom to share with not just new faculty members, but I think new staff members and new students as well. Great. Just as a reminder, folks, that there is an opportunity to put questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many questions as possible. Next I want to talk about, like, for you all as panelists in your respective roles, um, like how have you contributed to inclusion, diversity, and a sense of belonging for all members of the engineering community, but especially those from underrepresented or marginalized backgrounds? So how can each of you in your respective roles contribute to fostering those things for all members of the engineering community? So Zainab, how about we start with you? Can you talk a little bit about your work and how you've done that?
Yeah, well, my group mostly has done a few like Heritage Month events, including the Native American Heritage Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, and a lot of others. Usually we just take it as an opportunity to bring the community together And I feel like a lot of engineers are like very focused in and working like all the time. So sometimes it's not only a break from work, but also an opportunity to learn something new, whether we can bring a speaker to talk about that culture that we're representing for that month, or to bring a, I don't know, a dance instructor or something to teach those cultural dances. It's just like a fun experience that brings people together and allows them to learn about something they probably otherwise wouldn't have learned about. Um, I think, yeah, it's just taking people outside of their comfort zone a lot more. And I think there's still much to be done within the group, about like facilitating a lot more diverse types of events instead of just like strictly one or two types of events. Um, and I think in my volunteering experience, also kind of a very similar thing, and just, you know, I had gone to different schools and worked with a lot of different programs associated with the university, and like doing projects for kids and just getting them exposed to the sciences. And whether, I think it's pretty good how they do it, because it's not just like strictly one type of project. Like they would do robotics and like other projects related to like biology, and just a lot of different types of stuff that kids could explore. If they're not good at one thing, they might like something else. But yeah, I think like those small things, like in terms of volunteering and small DEI work that I've done with my group, I've been able to help with those, I guess those represent those underrepresented groups.
That's great. Thank you for those examples. And what I really resonated with was this idea of like you talked about showing up, you talked about the volunteer work that you've done, and how that can serve as a break from the amounts of other work and engineering work that you have. So thank you for that. What about you, Jordan? How in your role have you contributed to fostering inclusivity, diversity, and sense of belonging?
Yeah, thinking a little bit more specifically about my department as like a DEI coordinator, it's been really just important understanding that people are the experts of their own experiences, and that I don't hold every single identity. I don't personally identify with every single identity. And so instead of assuming what other people want or need within our department, gaining an understanding and meeting them where they're at, bringing them into the conversation so that we can work collaboratively about what next steps we need to take to make our department more inclusive, more welcoming, whether that's bringing in more mentoring, community building events, recognition of cultural celebrations, et cetera. But on the more college level scale, I also meet with other DEI coordinators and managers from other departments. I meet with OCCE just to see what's going on in other departments, what's working, what isn't working, how we can share and collaborate together, where we can collaborate on events to make our whole college community more connected and bring that sense of community and belonging to the college level. So just really using my networks to gain a better understanding of not just what's going on in my department, but outside departments as well, and how we can kind of bridge those together.
That's great. I think that, so much of the work is done by relationship, right? So, building a network becomes really important both within your department and throughout the college. What about you, John? Can you talk a little bit about the work that you've done, um, fostering that sense of belonging?
For sure, for sure. Yeah, so it's very much a multi-scale approach, because you have to start by, self-education to some degree, right? You have to learn from experts in topics, hear other people's experience, right? You can't start with just yourself. From there, it's kind of then, as faculty, it's your classroom, right? Making sure that you're doing things that reflect inclusivity, making sure everyone feels heard. Like I teach ME 211. It's an intro to solid mechanics course. I have 70 to 90 students per year, and I make sure I learn every single person's name. it's simple things like that. I say good morning to every single person that comes in. It's something I really care about. I mean, making sure folks feel like they can go into a place and learn in that environment, um, and be encouraged to do so, to not be like the gatekeeper of mechanical engineering, but rather the coach of mechanical engineering, right? Um, those are critical. Like, it's not just I mean, it's a space, but to know that they belong in that space, to feel like they're as entitled to learning as anyone else, right? And to push against what maybe the fabric of our society has kind of drilled into into us. Um, Above that, then there's, yeah, of course, my work at DAC-FC, which is the Dean's Advisory Committee for Faculty of Color. It's about professional well-being. I mean, that's really what we want to make sure we have the pulse of. And it's not a monolith of a community by any means, as I think Jordan mentioned earlier. We have a wide variety, Zainab as well. I mean, we have wide, uh, career stages, demographics, folks who are representing others. I mean, it's everything. And so you have to hear folks out and make sure that those who have the power to pull the levers that will change things know that there are things going on, and that we can solve some of these problems via resources, right? And then there's broader than that. There's nationally, right? I mean, looking at improving student outcomes in STEM, which is such a big, complicated, wicked problem, as they're referred to, right? Uh, by actually putting data on what is this like at not just Michigan, but other institutions as well, and how can we do something about it? It's really what we need to do. And so all of that multi-scale everything comes down to, I think, two pieces, which are opportunity and agency. These are like the critical two components. If you have just one, you can't really do it, right? You need both. And so there's always a question of what's restricted, right? What's restricted? Is it opportunity, agency, or both? And how can we solve those? Is it resources? Is it whatever? And I in addition to those, like I also like I care about different communities too, especially like kids that could have been me back in preschool. And so I'll show this really quick, but I'm like working on a kid's book that we're like translating into English, Spanish, and Chinese about what's called the happy gelatinous cube. And it's about my soft material research, but we're actually it's gonna have some degree of like, there's one squishy cube and it doesn't fit into a world of only hard engineering materials. So there's a lot of this, and it resonates with kids on a deep level, right? And you experience these things. And then to show that, look, this is science and you can do it is I mean, it can be motivating at all these different stages, right? So I don't know, do what you love, but it's a multi-scale approach at the end of the day.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I love that agency and opportunity piece. Sometimes I identify with being a squishy cube as well.
I think I'm
So
always a squishy cube. Yeah, it's
yeah. So I'm going to flip topics a little bit. I want to talk about conflict. Specifically, like, how do you navigate and resolve conflicts or disagreements when they arise within the engineering community? Communities are made of people. People will inevitably come across and encounter conflict. And what role does leadership play in addressing these challenges? So, how do you navigate and resolve conflicts? John, let's start with you.
Sure. I think, I'll give a shout out here to Heidi Sharek, who is like a leadership expert, and works with folks at the college. And I've even personally like gone through leadership training with her, and a big portion of that was in conflict resolution. And there are of course tools for that, right? There are like just methodologies by which you can, help do that. But I think most of them come down to discourse. It's just talking with people, right? Hearing out what what's generating the conflict, right? Addressing or identifying where it's coming from, and trying to move forward with like, first, are we in the stage of like what stage of the conflict are we in, right? Is this fully escalated? Are we ramping up? Like, and just even going through that just talking process with whomever the conflict is impacting oftentimes leads to resolution without even the quote unquote leader or whatever doing anything, right? I mean, it's like folks know themselves, and I think in the college broadly we are collegial. It is one of our values. It's one of those five values, and certainly in and I'll give a shout out to mechanical engineering too. Like, folks in this department, we respect each other. And across other departments too, there is this like respect in the community of we're all here, we're on the same team, and that does kind of supersede the local conflicts that show up. But sometimes you need mediation, right? Like, and you have to find the right person to do that sometimes, and it will be uh, I don't know. That's why we have structures in the college to try and facilitate that to some degree, right? It's why we have, when it's really personal, we have the care center, right? Angie Farahi is one of the best out there, and so like you got to know who you can go to also to talk about things. But one of the things we do in DEC of C, like we have a regular, we have regular community meetings. And I wouldn't say we always agree on things. Like there's a wide range of opinion, but we respect the space. We respect each other in the space, right? So at the end of the day, we can speak in a spirited way, but it's not ad hominem attacks or anything. We're there to like try and come to solutions. And if you know that going into anything, if all the parties involved want to get through it, generally that's what happens at the end of the day.
That's great. And that's a great shout out to those tools that are out there, the, culture of coaching and learning that we have at the college, but also mediation as an important tool as well. So thanks for shouting those out. So navigating and resolving conflicts. Zainab, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, just going off of what John said, I think like it's very important to be attending, I don't know, leadership workshops and just taking advantage of those resources because you could always learn more and become a better leader and facilitator for these conversations. But in like dealing with conflicts, I think like just the basic, steps would be trying to find the root problem or the root cause and try to get a bunch of different viewpoints on that and work towards a mutual resolution. But sometimes you'll find that there is a majority opinion and a minority opinion. And like, while the majority is probably the one that ends up getting implemented, it's really important to not forget that minority opinion just because what we're doing now is very comfortable or whatever opinion seems like it's right doesn't mean that it is in the long run. So I think it's like very important to still keep track of those minority opinions and try to implement small changes if possible. Like it's not something that happens like right away, but like just to be mindful of those like very small like opinions or stuff that seems small to us at the moment.
So the diversity of thought, diversity of opinions becomes really important. Deep listening is something that I'm getting from your advice. So thank you for that. Jordan, any thoughts about managing and navigating, resolving conflict?
Yeah, and I think Zainab, what you said really like resonated with me in the way of trying to honor that diversity of thought, and really trying to understand and ask those important questions on how people came to their beliefs or their perspectives and why people have a certain belief or a certain perspective when it comes to like conflicts and disagreements, just because there always is a why behind it. And I think unpacking that and fleshing that out and having a better understanding of it allows us to better honor that diversity of thought, and how we can move forward in implementing a little bit of everyone, and not to diminish anything in any way, but to make sure that we bring everyone in our community to light and we highlight everyone within our community. But my other piece would also be that, especially when different conflicts or disagreements come up, doing my own self-reflection and understanding my initial reaction, but then reflecting and kind of coming to a point to where my response is something rational and not just something immediate based off of my immediate thoughts. So also just looking within myself so that when I approach these conversations, I'm coming from a place where I feel grounded, and I feel like I can actually speak on the topic from a place that isn't kind of infiltrated by bias. And the last is just kind of, as John said too, we have a DEI committee within my department. When different things come up, conflicts, disagreements, what have you, it is a conversation, and we have created a space where we have an expectation of how we speak to each other, the way that we respect each other, and the way that we honor each other. And that's really been built through trust. And I feel, very privileged with the people on my committee that everyone is so respectful of those standards. But that has been really important to having those conversations, is creating a space where people can actually speak freely and feel like they can be respected and that they are heard, and not just that they are, speaking into the void, or it's kind of, mob mentality or anything like that. So that's been really important to navigating those conversations.
If I may actually jump in here too, because that setting up a space is critical. Jordan's right on it. I mean, like, and for those of you in potential leadership positions now, you're the one in charge of that, right? Like your classroom, you choose the respectfulness of your space, and that's something that can be forgotten a lot of the time. That like you get to pick that, and you get to set expectations about that, and by having those, it just makes that kind of discourse possible. Otherwise, it'll fester. I mean, that's the problem, right? So yeah, respect to Jordan's crew, because that's exactly how.
Yeah, thank you. I think that setting up and holding that space and how you choose to do that becomes really important, and really indicates to people the type of environment that you're trying to set up, and allows people to be more open in that environment. And I think that is definitely key. So yeah, thank you, Jordan and John, for speaking to that. We got a pre-submitted question vis-a-vis the RSVP form. And I think it's really important that we talk about, like, how do we get our leaders to buy into the change we want to see? We all either report to or are influenced by or are accountable to different people. So how do we get our leaders to buy into the change we want to see? Zainab, can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's a process for sure. But like, other than, being able to diversify our work and bring in more people, like a way to let them buy into that change would probably be to allow them to see that some of the challenges that we have right now, like, climate change and, just advancing in medical science in general, we would really need like our top minds on it. And we want like a diverse group of people working on these issues. We want to bring a lot more people with different ways of thinking and different backgrounds that could contribute to all these things. And if anything, like a lot of studies have like shown that diversity improves innovation and problem solving more than anything. And they'd be benefiting in the long run by diversifying, STEM and just work in general.
Absolutely. So this idea of diversifying the scientists and leads to good science. Great. Um, what do you think, Jordan? How do we get our leaders to buy in?
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of power in storytelling,
Mhm.
and shedding light on what our community members want and need. And there are a lot of moving parts in higher education, but at the end of the day, it is about the people and us here together, working to be the best people we can be. And so taking the stories of our community members, what they are voicing, and presenting that to leadership, but also presenting it in a way that is strategic, developing an action plan to show action items of how we can make this change happen, and how it's realistic for the resources that we currently have, how we can capitalize on our resources. But then also, with what we have been doing, being able to show something for our work. So, kind of going back to that evaluation and assessment, and being able to show outcomes that have happened, or if there's something we want to implement, showing how it has worked elsewhere, showing those outcomes, showing the data for that. Um, I think is really important, just to kind of back up that there is going to be, fruit to come from this, and it might take, this many steps, but at least those steps are visible and they can be seen, and there's a timeline there.
Yeah, I think that talking about outcomes is really effective, but also what she said about storytelling. Stories that talk about impact can be really effective. John, any advice on how we get our leaders to buy into the change we want to see?
Yeah, there's several. I mean, I think again, I wholeheartly agree with Jordan here. Like, there's the way I kind of see requesting resources for change is for those of you who are faculty here, it's like writing a proposal. I mean, it's you have the background information of what's the context, right? Then what your expected impact with this being solved would be, and then you need preliminary data, right? You need to say this is the these are what's going on right now and why we think this is really going to make a difference. If you can make that argument for that, I mean, then it's yeah, that all makes sense, right? As opposed to like bringing up the problem and then it's like we need resources, but for what, right? And then it becomes this like it's a harder conversation to have. So you got to go in with like this is what we need and this is why, and it has to be like clear and just you know I think it's in part because our leaders have a lot of things going on, right? Like a lot of things on their plates. And so you've got to make that argument in 30 seconds, and then you've got to make that argument over whatever the span of your meeting is, right? So it's in part the challenges in part are not because of like well often not for any like trivializing the subject or anything. It tends to be more like that folks aren't experts in the areas of DEI, let's say in general. And so they need to know what that background is a lot of the time. That has to be really like enunciated fully. And for those with more like lived experience, it's like, well, it's like this, and you need to believe me on this because I've experienced this, but you just enunciate it that way, right? Like this is, I had to have, for example, like I had to have a chat with my parents going into grad school. It was, and I refer to it as the chat because it's not a unique circumstance by any means, but like, why do you want to do a PhD? Don't you want to just like go work and like actually make money? Like, and this is a common experience in like in many minoritized communities, and I tell some of my majority colleagues this, they're like, what are you talking about? Like, my parents who are both doctors would have never said that. It's like, yeah, no kidding. And so some of this is lived experience, but our not everyone in positions of power like really can understand that. So there's a combo of like, yes, you need your literature, but I mean, the storytelling, as you guys have just mentioned, is also key and critical because sometimes it really makes a difference of like, what? Like those are the initial conditions. What are you talking about? It's crazy, and that starts the conversation that results in resources. So I think that's how we do it.
I love this concept of like making your case in 30 minutes, but also over the span of your meeting. I really resonate with that and thinking about making the case and what a return is and weaving stories in there. I think it's a great playbook. Um, you know, the um, the topic of like safety and security in our departments popped up a little earlier. Jordan, you talked about holding space, and Johnny talked about holding space in the classroom. So how do you ensure that safety and security in a typical engineering department? Jordan, I want to start with you. How do you um, form the safety and security in an engineering department?
Yeah, and this is a topic that we actually in the DEI committee within my department we talk about quite a bit. It's just about building trust and laying that foundation of trust. Because if people can't trust you, they don't feel safe with you. And there's also understanding that trust is not given, it is earned. And especially when I stepped into this position, I did not expect anyone to trust me, and for very good reason. You don't know me. And so as I've continued navigating this position, the new people I meet and engage in this work, they also have no reason to trust me because they don't know me. And so it's my job to get to know these people, but also let them know me as well and build those relationships with the people around me so that there can be trust, so that I can make myself someone that people can come to, but also making sure that it's not performative, making sure that it's authentic and understanding that I can be a place and these other individuals with whom I work with can be a place that people can turn to. But the second thing is, as John kind of brought up a little bit earlier, is just like knowing your resources and knowing who you can turn to should challenges or issues arise that are escalated to a point that you need to bring in outside individuals to make sure that safety is there. So, understanding people inside my department, outside of my department, within the college that can intervene, so should that be needed, to make sure that everyone feels safe and comfortable and like they are at home within my department and the college at large.
That's great. Trust key, right? And I often say that trust is built on experience. Um, Zainab, how do you ensure safety and security in a typical engineering department?
Yeah, just like highlighting what's already been mentioned by Jordan and John, just about knowing your resources and, the stuff that you won't be able to directly help with, you at least would be able to lead them to the proper person or proper group who can. Um, Other really important things would probably be, um, I guess like when a person comes with positive or negative experiences, allowing them to be comfortable to speak about these issues and not like kind of letting it sweep under the rug, like keeping like you have to acknowledge that experience and validate it, but you also like if it's like a negative experience or something bad has happened, like you have to be able to acknowledge that that has happened and take, steps to be able to make that person or that group feel safe in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. This idea that once you know something, you should really do something about it, right? Is key. John, any thoughts about engineering departments and ensuring safety and security?
Yeah, past what's already been said, which is excellent on all fronts here. I think it's critical to do a couple other things. One, to have community guidelines. Like that should be written somewhere, not just like, understood, because folks join a community, they leave communities, and those spaces evolve over time. So actually having community guidelines with any kind of working group, especially, I think is really excellent. And CRLT actually has a template for this in case anyone was wondering of where to potentially get that. The I think it's also important for folks who are in charge of spaces to know or be told the state of those spaces. So, for
Hmm.
example, like if I'm in a faculty meeting and the faculty meeting starts getting hostile, but my department chair wasn't there on some day, this is a hypothetical. This is not something that happened. um, it's important that the person who's in charge of the kind of working state of that room knows what went down, right, and can do something about that challenge. And that's if you're just a person in the space as opposed to the leader of the space. If you're the leader of that space, it's on you to go talk to that person and make sure that they're they're adhering to the community guidelines of that space, right? And that is a safety issue, right? Like, because folks will then be pushed to the fringes and not want to take part in that kind of conversation or be part of that space or whatever. So that's critical. But then, just from another standpoint, and I'm not sure if this fully gets to safety and security, but it's important nonetheless, is just lowering barriers between groups, right? So
Hmm.
if it's faculty and staff, if it's staff and students, if it's faculty and students, I mean, it's critical to get to lower the glass panes that often kind of exist between those groups. Because at the end of the day, I mean, faculty are just students fast forwarded, and it's easy to forget that in the structure that academia is, right? And the same goes with staff, right? Like it's we're all on the same team, and it's easy to forget this if these dynamics are more what you feel like you're interacting with than the people that are in the dynamic, if that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, it's I don't know, confluence of things, but there might be more to security, and if whoever asked the question had further thoughts on that, I'd be interested to hear it. But I'm sure Gabe, you could probably weigh in on that side as well too.
Yeah, beyond what has already been said, I think the strategies are sound. I think that, um, you know, uh, like ensuring safety and security, it's so hard to ensure anything, right? But really trust is built on experience, and really fostering that trust is really important. Um, with about 5 minutes left, I'm going to invite some closing comments. Today we talked about a lot of things about being a culture leader at Michigan Engineering, holding space to be vulnerable, fostering resilience, being bold and seeking and enumerating and adhering to our values, promoting cultures of learning and transparency. So I'm wondering and Zainab, I'll start with you. Any closing thoughts about being a culture leader at Michigan Engineering?
Well, I think overall it's been a very pleasant experience. It's honestly been very eye-opening. I have learned a lot about different cultures and different groups that I probably wouldn't have if I wasn't in this type of work or groups. And I just think like to constantly be learning and seeking knowledge is extremely important. You can never settle and never think like I understand everything or I know everything. Always be ready to, prove yourself wrong multiple times. And that's the most important thing in working in DEI at all.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. John.
Yeah, very much in the same tone. I mean, really, um, knowing what folks are going through is critical to any kind of mission, right? Where we need to always keep our pulse on the communities that need support the most, and that changes based on context societally. It changes based on context institutionally, nationally. I mean, there are just so many levels of this. So that open dialogue is absolutely critical all the time. But then the other thing, and maybe this is more forward facing, it's to always try to aim bigger. I'm really involved in the Next Prof series, which is especially aimed at um, students continuing from academia, well, in their in early stages of academia into eventual faculty positions, and there's so much opportunity there to continue to just like encourage and uplift folks, right? And it's I think see it's what Gabe said before is how do you lift as you climb. That's on it, right? I mean, it's just these are the kinds of efforts that as we're going through our own trials and tribulations of our stage of our career to continue trying to like uplift folks that need it. If you can manage that, I mean, it's not only very personally fulfilling, but it makes a huge impact, and it's huge impact that we really need here at the end of the day.
Thank you. Thank you. Last thoughts, Jordan.
Yeah, I would just say that this work can be uncomfortable. These conversations can be uncomfortable. Um, and I just encourage people to lean into your discomfort. I think discomfort is when change work happens. And just kind of know that your fleeting moment of discomfort could be catalytic in an entire community's empowerment. And so your discomfort will not be without reward in these conversations, and it's important to engage in these, or else the status quo will always continue, and sometimes the status quo isn't what's best. So just keep leaning into discomfort would be my biggest point.
Keep leaning into discomfort. Absolutely. Thank you, Zainab, Jordan, and John, for this engaging conversation. It's been an amazing experience talking about how to be a culture leader at Michigan Engineering. For participants of today's panel, there'll be a short survey to collect your feedback on today's lecture. That link is in the chat. Thank you again for attending, everyone, and have a great day.